Hello, my name is Frances Widdowson, and I was a tenured professor at Mount Royal University in Calgary from 2008 to 2021, who was found to have been wrongfully terminated for making 6 satirical tweets, filing a complaint that was deemed to be frivolous and vexatious, and contributing to a toxic workplace. These grounds for discipline were summarized in 3 bullet points in my termination letter. 12 reasons were added by MRU after the fact to claim that my employment relationship was no longer viable. I have already produced a video about the 6 satirical tweets and will be producing a video on the trumped-up charge of making a frivolous and vexatious complaint at a later date. The focus of this video is on one of the 12 examples provided by President Tim Rawley in my termination letter. It should be pointed out that arbitrator David Philip Jones found that only examples 7, 10, and 12 were substantiated, and number 7 failed to recognize that numerous others had also contributed to a toxic workplace at MRU. One of these examples, number 4, is particularly telling about the current problems of institutional censorship that we are facing at universities. This is an Arts Faculty Council meeting that was held on March 5th, 2021, 9 months before I was fired. Although it is just one meeting, I cannot overemphasize its importance. This is because the meeting had an important historical context and then was constantly used against me over a period of 3 years. Showing what happened will give the public some idea of how MRU is no longer an academic institution, as it is being controlled by equity, diversity, and inclusion activists. One of the major preoccupations of these activists is with indigenization of the university. The March 5th, 2021 Arts Faculty Council meeting appears as the 4th example on my termination letter, where President Tim Rawley states that your conduct at a meeting in the spring of 2021 was so disruptive that it was a significant contributing factor to the development of new procedures for Arts Faculty Council meetings, as well as disabling the chat function during these meetings. As will be seen from materials presented in this video, MRU's constant attempts to distort the events surrounding this example and intentionally ignoring my attempts to correct the misinformation that was being spread about the meeting shows the length to which activist universities will go to justify their violations of the academic freedom of dissident professors. The violation of academic freedom has to do with MRU's assault on what is called collegial governance. As has been defined by the Canadian Association of University Teachers, CAUT, the organization formed to protect academic freedom in Canada, collegiality is the full participation of academic staff in institutional processes that shape the conditions of academic work. It is not about comportment or congeniality or civility. It concerns allowing a diversity of opinions, not biasing proceedings against particular individuals, and giving all faculty members who should be participating an opportunity to do so. The March 5th incident was not the first Arts Faculty Council meeting where collegial governance was thwarted. The former chair of my department, Dwayne Bratt, testified at my arbitration hearing on May 15th, 2023, that this suppression of discussion also occurred 2 years earlier at another Arts Faculty Council meeting, when the Dean's Advisory Group, or DAG, in association with Dean Jennifer Pettit, decided that there would be no questions allowed following a presentation made by 2 transgender guest speakers. And Brat testified that this was specifically about Dr. Widdowson. The dean and the chairs of the DAG wanted to prevent my participation, specifically because it was decided that any questions that I would ask would constitute using this as an opportunity to pursue my own research agenda, and this would create a toxic environment within Arts Faculty Council. Brat also asserted that my questions should not be allowed because there was a large power imbalance, because the 2 people giving the presentation were a contract faculty member and a student, D.A. Dirks and Nathan Lawley. With respect to the March 5th, 2021 AFC meeting, the saga began on September 25th, 2019, when I traveled to the University of Calgary to attend a talk by Dr. Gregory Cajete, an indigenous scholar from the University of New Mexico and an advocate for what he called native science. Dr. Cajete was giving a talk on the importance of indigenous star knowledge for astronomy. While traveling to the talk, presciently, it would turn out, I stopped to buy a tape recorder. I used my new purchase to record the talk and the question that I asked.
Thank you very much for your talk. My name's Francis. We're at Mount Royal University currently trying to indigenize the science curriculum. I'm just wondering about your thoughts on how this material with respect to astronomy could be incorporated into, for example, astronomy classes or other science classes. I'm not quite sure whether this presentation is looking at how indigenous people understood the stars and so on historically, or whether you think that this can actually contribute to existing science courses, especially things like astronomy courses. Because you were a science teacher yourself, you're probably aware that the discovery of the telescope, especially beginning in the times of Galileo and astronomy that occurred there, astronomy has advanced tremendously in the last couple hundred years. And if you didn't have a telescope, if these cultures didn't have a telescope, I'm not sure how these stories would be able to contribute to the courses in the actual sciences at Mount Royal. Thank you.
Although I did not know this at the time, the talk was attended by Gabrielle Lindstrom, who now goes by her maiden name, Gabrielle Weaselhead, an Indigenous Studies professor who is devoted to advancing Indigenous perspectives and worldviews and elevating Indigenous knowledge. Dr. Lindstrom was very upset by my question. She told an investigator, in fact, that she felt like crying as she believed the interaction was very disrespectful and embarrassing for her. This led Lindstrom, a year later, to try to mobilize an anonymous, supposedly student-led group, MRU Racial Advocacy, to try to get me fired for defending the journalist Wendy Mesley's reference to the title of Pierre Valier's book, White Niggers of America. According to Lindstrom, this amounted to hiding behind academia to spread racist views. When the anonymous MRU Racial Advocacy asserted that this is violent and it makes you wonder, how can someone like this teach and grade without racial bias? What will be the last straw, MRU? Lindstrom replied, she's been at it for so long, we seriously need to consider your question. What will it take for the university to stop in their complicity? A student or faculty member who's pushed to the edge? She then urged that a complaint be filed with the president of the university. Go right to the top, she said. Lindstrom also maintained that the residential school system was not up for debate. She opposed any faculty member challenging the claims made by indigenous elders about the residential schools being genocidal. Lindstrom then filed a harassment complaint against me on October 22nd, 2020. In this complaint, Lindstrom asserted that I had attended public academic events held off campus where I had challenged and expressed open hostility to indigenous cultures in ways that she could only define as racist and discriminatory. Later on, this was made more specific by the investigator hired by MRU, and it was stated that one of the allegations in Lindstrom's complaint was that at an Indigenous Knowledge public lecture series featuring Dr. Gregory Cajete on September 25th, 2019, after Dr. Cajete gave a 75-minute lecture explaining what Indigenous science is, you identified yourself as being from MRU, and you made racist and discriminatory remarks when you asked Dr. Cajete what Indigenous science is and stated that Indigenous science is not science. This investigator found that Lindstrom's allegations concerning the public lecture have not been substantiated because they were made in the context of university settings during public debates on social and political issues. While Gabrielle Lindstrom's complaint was being investigated, she left for the University of Calgary. On October 20th, 2020, it was announced that she had been appointed as the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning's educational development consultant in Indigenous ways of knowing. This announcement came 2 days before Lindstrom submitted her harassment complaint against me. In this way, Lindstrom could avoid being subject to a cross complaint from me, explaining that I was merely reacting to Lindstrom's efforts to instigate an academic mobbing against me. In a resignation letter to MRU, Lindstrom opposed my challenging of the validity of Indigenous knowledges and the testimonies of Indigenous residential school survivors. According to Lindstrom, this amounted to MRU senior leadership not protecting her health and well-being and their inability to provide an environment that honored her basic human right to work in spaces free from racism and discrimination. A month later, 2 weeks before Lindstrom left MRU, I attended a Mount Royal Faculty Association meeting where Lindstrom's resignation was brought up. In this meeting, Professor Peter Choate, a professor in social work, remarked that
MRU's been facing a whole bunch of media stories and substantial internal and external conversation about racism. We have recently seen the departure of an Indigenous Studies faculty as a result of racism in the university, which was not properly dealt with. And I think that the MRAFA has a role in establishing a professional sense of what it is that the university should and shouldn't be doing. I recognize the university is ultimately responsible but I also look for some leadership from MRFA on the issue.
This led me to comment that it was inappropriate for him to make these allegations of racism. I then explained what was actually behind Lindstrom's accusations of racism.
I just wanted to say, I think that was very inappropriate of Peter Choate to make that comment. We have had all sorts of accusations of racism that have been made over the last 4 months, largely against me, perhaps against other people. Just so people are aware of this, the concerns were about defending Wendy Mesley's use of a book title and saying that the residential schools weren't genocidal. That is being called racist by a number of people. And this is the big issue that, and I know people are getting upset about this, but we need, as a faculty association, to have a wide discussion about all these things that you guys were talking about in this workshop, white supremacy culture and so on and so forth. This is contested terrain, and we need to have open discussion about this. I'm not saying that my view of anything should prevail, but I have a point of view which should be allowed to be expressed. We talk about being inclusive, and this is just going back to some of the things you were saying, Lee, and I appreciate how you're trying to hold everything together here, but you mentioned things like diversity and inclusion. People are saying, I don't belong at Mount Royal University because I make academic arguments that they don't like. This is unacceptable at a university. A university is a place for discussing ideas. I totally accept that discrimination is wrong. I'm opposed to racism, but if people want to look at Sinclair MacRae's 13-page letter, he has shown how my views are not racist, and I'm getting a bit tired of having to listen to these unsubstantiated accusations being made.
My comment led Renae Watchman, the co-director of the Office of Academic Indigenization, to defame me as a racist in front of about 100 people. Watchman had received awards for being an unapologetic voice for social justice in the MRU community and around the world, and for making post-secondary education more inclusive.
So it's well, it can be tiring to be constantly talking about racism. It's even more tiring to be the target of racism, and I think that's where we have some gross discrepancies. There is a level of harassment that has been accepted by the university by this faculty member who is tired of being called a racist. But if she just stops being racist, maybe we'll stop, calling her out. And again, she hasn't had to actually endure these racist attacks. And I think that's the tiring thing.
Watchman's reaction to my concern that the allegations of racism against me were unsubstantiated, therefore, was to make more unsubstantiated accusations of racism. This all provides a backdrop for the meeting that was to occur a few months later, the March 5th, 2021 Arts Faculty Council meeting. This meeting was to become example 4 in my termination letter, and extensively discussed, and it was extensively discussed at my arbitration hearing throughout 2023. This meeting began with a visit from Elizabeth Evans, the acting provost at the time, who was introduced by Jennifer Pettit, the Dean of Arts. Evans gave a presentation on how COVID-19 was impacting the university. After discussing the challenges the university was facing due to COVID-19 for about 7 minutes, Evans took questions from the audience. The third person to ask a question was Liam Haggarty, a professor in the Department of Humanities who specialized in Indigenous studies. Haggarty noted that a number of Indigenous scholars had left MRU and then asked a question about how a safe working environment could be provided for Indigenous faculty. In response, the provost gave her thoughts on the matter.
Hi, Liz. Thanks very much for visiting our council and for answering some questions today. Really appreciate the engagement. One of the things on the agenda for the president's or for the dean's report today is new cluster or new tenure track hires, which I think might include the hires in Indigenous studies. And we've been having some really productive conversations in our Department of Humanities about how to best support new hires in general and Indigenous faculty members in particular. And I know there's a lot going on institutionally as well, refreshing the Indigenous strategic plan, hiring the new AVP position. And I think, these are really, really important conversations. And I'm really happy to be part of conversations around kind of the retention and empowerment of new faculty and Indigenous faculty in particular, to try to remove or address some of the barriers that Indigenous faculty members have faced, and to ensure that Mount Royal is a safe place, a safe working environment for all of our colleagues. And so I was wondering, and I want to point out too that even though these are new hires, effectively they're going to be largely replacement hires because they are, filling positions that have been or are being vacated by faculty. I think it's important to kind of to be aware of that. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, and I know I might be jumping the gun because I know Jen will likely speak to this later in the meeting, but I was just wondering whether at the administrative level, there's anything that you could share with us about plans for or ideas around kind of recruitment and retention, especially of Indigenous faculty, specifically some of the, I'm aware of some recommendations that have been made previously by Indigenous faculty members related to retention and support. And hopefully not to jump the gun on anything that's coming later, but just wondering whether it's something that you could address or have anything to share with this body today. Thank you.
And thank you for the question, Liam, and for the context as well that you provided around that. I would imagine that if this is being discussed later, that you will be addressing more of the specifics in terms of what the intent and what the plans are. I think you've touched on something though that I feel very strongly about, and I think it's really important that the university feels strongly about, is that we understand that we have not done some things well, and we acknowledge that and we recognize that, and we also understand that we need to address those issues. I'm aware that there have been some recommendations that have now surfaced that we weren't aware had been made before, and we will and are addressing those. This doesn't correct things, but I do want people to understand that we have learned and that we need to recognize that we've learned and make sure that I think the worst mistakes are the ones when you repeat mistakes. And so let's make sure that we don't do that going forward this time. I'm also mindful, and you mentioned the fact that we have faculty who have left, and I'm sorry to see that. That's obviously not what we ever want to see happen. But I'm also mindful, and I'll share this. This is a concern I have for the university, is that we are seeing several of our quality faculty members and people who have established themselves as both quality teachers and quality researchers being sought out now by other comprehensive universities. And that's a challenge for us because we know that comprehensive universities can offer some things to our faculty members that we can't. And so I want to make sure that we are diligent and mindful of that as we bring new faculty in, that we do bring them in with the desire and intention to support them, to create the environment for them, and to find the ways that make sure that we help retain them as well. And certainly those are the conversations that are certainly Tim and I are having, and certainly Jen and I have had as well as we embark upon this hiring, and we are very committed to this hiring and to doing some things right this time by making those hires. So hopefully that touched on at least a bit of what you were asking about, Leah.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I appreciate you articulating that commitment here today, and really look forward to learning about how some of those concrete actions that can come from it. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam.
Haggarty's exchange with the provost was followed by a question from Mary Lee Mulholland, a professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, who was concerned about the retention of what she called BIPOC faculty, those who were Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
Joint Committee on Diversity and Equity between the university and the MRFA. I've sent some emails about this too, but as we talk about the retention and recruitment of Indigenous and Black and people of color to Mount Royal, in Article 24 of the MRFA and the collective agreement, it says all of this in that article about equity and diversity, and particularly a focus on reducing barriers and encouraging retention. And, you know, we've been waiting 5 years for the report from JDEC, and we know from the survey that it didn't ask any questions about retention of BIPOC faculty. It didn't deal with any of the pay equity that is dealt with by, just from what we saw from the survey questions. That committee did not deal with the intersectionality of inequity at Mount Royal, and particularly around retention of BIPOC faculty. And we've asked when that report will be released, and we are not hearing when that report will be released. And so I'm asking for a date when that report with the data at the aggregate level will be released to faculty, so we can decide what gaps are still existing in our knowledge around inequity at Mount Royal. Thank you.
The provost responded by saying that the mandate of the committee referred to by Mulholland was about gender pay equity, and did not concern gathering data about the retention of BIPOC faculty, which resulted in a further exchange between the provost and Mulholland.
As to the work coming out of Article 24 and JDEC, I actually sat on that committee. I was one of the original board members on that committee. And I want to make a point of clarification. The mandate given to that committee was always about gender pay equity for full-time faculty. So the gaps that you're talking about, and totally acknowledge that those areas need to be addressed and need to be understood, but that was not the mandate that was given to that committee, and it's not what that committee undertook. So I want to manage that expectation. But
in the Article 24 is all equity-seeking groups under human rights legislation. It does not specify gender in that article.
I understand that, Mary Lee, but let's be clear about the other aspect of this. We do not collect the data that you're talking about. We do not demand that people declare on other issues other than gender to identify themselves. So I think it's really important to understand that we have a very specific step that needs to be taken first to address what you're talking about. Do we want to do that? Are we committed to do that? Absolutely. But we do not have the data right at the moment to be able to do that. And so the undertaking, and I will go back to when that committee was formed, was around a gender equity study. And it did not attempt to try and address areas and situations which we have no data for right at the moment. So do we need to do that? Absolutely we will. And that's one of the recommendations that is coming out of this report, is a lot more ongoing data and information. As far as declaring a date for release of the aggregate findings. I'm in conversations with JDEC and with the MRFA, and we will be bringing forward that information as soon as possible.
So that data will be released then?
The aggregate findings will be, yes.
Yeah.
These comments about the problems of retaining Indigenous scholars led me to be concerned because I knew that Gabrielle Lindstrom had left MRU because she had claimed that my criticisms of indigenization had made her feel unsafe. Therefore, I thought it was necessary to ask a question to alert faculty members to the fact that the retention problems were related to Indigenous scholars finding criticism of indigenization to be unwelcome. This resulted in me having an exchange with the provost. Thank you very much, Liz. I was in a meeting this morning about academic freedom and the capacity of universities to be able to allow faculty members to ask uncomfortable questions. And my question follows on something that Dr. Haggarty said in his discussion, which was making the university a safe place for Indigenous faculty and what is going on with respect to the cluster hires that are occurring. I am just wondering, it's come to my attention that a number of concerns and the retention problem with respect to this is Indigenous faculty members feel that asking questions about certain aspects of indigenization are seen as unwelcome at Mount Royal. And I'm just wondering how Mount Royal University is going to ensure that the university is a safe space for those of us who want to ask these uncomfortable questions about things like indigenization. The university is an academic environment where we're encouraged to pursue the truth, ask questions about whether various policies are desirable. What is the university going to be doing to make sure that critics of things like indigenization, Indigenous knowledge, and so on, the residential schools, will be protected at Mount Royal University? Thank you.
So obviously I wasn't at the presentation that you're referencing this morning, so I can't speak to what was discussed there. I think like any other university, we are committed to upholding academic freedom. But I think we also need to understand that that has to come in the context of a respectful work environment. And so where that and how that dialogue is undertaken needs to be done in that context. And I think Mount Royal is totally dedicated to finding the ways to create in an academic discussion the safe and respectful work environment where people can engage in those kinds of dialogues. Quite candidly, it's when they get outside of those respectful workplaces or where there isn't respect within the workplace that's upheld, that I think we start to understand that it isn't so much about academic freedom anymore as it is about the tone and the voice with which we conduct our conversations. So MRU is totally dedicated to that. I have heard the president speak about it often. I know that around the dean's discussions that that's very much what we're committed to as well. And we just need to find the ways of doing that.
This was immediately followed by another angry intervention from Renae Watchman, the Indigenous professor who made unsubstantiated allegations of racism against me a few months previously. In her comments at this meeting, Watchman referred to a document produced by the Office of Academic Indigenization that made reference to the need for MRU to build recognition and respect for Indigenous ways of knowing.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Liz, for sharing today. And I guess just to continue the conversation about the Indigenous faculty recommendations that we submitted in 2018 to the former provost, and that you've said you're just recently come across. I have heard that, you know, some of these we created a document that is separated into the 3 distinct areas that we as scholars, and so in scholarship, teaching, and service, as well as institutional climate. And basically, I think one thing I would like to hear is a profound support for this particular document for recruitment and retention, and support for, you know, quote unquote, it's not a cluster hire, it's a replacement hire, but, you know, to ensure that, you know, I don't think I would like to digress, and I don't think Indigenous faculty are scared of questions about indigenization. I think we're more, we're tired of having to continually educate. So one thing the document says is hire somebody that used to be the former SEMI position, which is the campus equity and meaningful inclusion, somebody that's in HR, somebody that is, whose job it is to educate on this, versus putting that burden on Indigenous faculty. I mean, I think the fact that the former speaker said that we're afraid of questions about indigenization, that's ridiculous. I mean, this is a national question. I think that we would have to still do a claim that we're afraid of living in this quote unquote country. So again, it's just the overburden of the service work, and on top of our own research and service. And so you have this document here. I have a ton of questions, and I want to see, and I want to see a public, you know, a display of support for this, and how you are going to ensure that faculty coming in are indeed supported.
So, thank you for that, Renae. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to touch on everything, but I'd be happy to have a conversation with you or with any of the faculty members about that document. And it actually would be very helpful for me to actually spend some time with you walking through that document. The one thing you raised, and I will speak to it now, is you raised CME. And I just want to remind everybody that that recently, in the changes that I made in the provost office, where with Evan Corton's moving on to create the Office of Institutional Research and Planning, that I actually brought Rhonda Cooper Burgess in to be the manager of academic initiatives. And we're shifting the focus from areas that Evan had created and developed and done an exceptionally great job with. But I'm working with Rhonda to address the equity, diversity, and inclusion issues. And in doing so, we also had Hala, upon her return from maternity leave, move into the provost office as well, so that we could better address what the real need within the organization is for the kind of support and training that you're talking about, that was envisioned at a CME and now needs to be re-envisioned and addressed again. But probably my final word on this is I'm inviting you to come and meet with, well, virtually meet with me, and you and others, and I would welcome the conversation around that document.
These exchanges left me dissatisfied. This was because the problem was being framed in terms of respect and civility, when I knew that much of the opposition was coming from Indigenous scholars like Watchman and Lindstrom, who were not able to tolerate criticisms of indigenization, despite Watchman's protestations to the contrary. This led me to pose another question to the Dean of Arts, Jennifer Pettit, later on in the meeting. Dean Pettit had just given a presentation about the Dean's report, and in this report, there was a reference to the fact that MRU would hire 3 positions in Indigenous studies, and that these positions would be supported and made to feel safe.
Tenure track hiring, as Liz had mentioned, we do finally have permission to hire 3 positions in Indigenous studies. These were hard to come by, as you can imagine, in this budget climate. One of these is actually a growth position in total for our cohort. And there will be more announcements forthcoming. I'm actually meeting Liz after this meeting to hear about what other hires and senior lecturer positions, if any, we've received. So I'm hopeful, fingers crossed. I do want to give a shout out to Tim, to Liz. Even when we thought our budget cut was going to be much, much larger, they committed to making sure these positions were retained as tenure track hires. And I know we already had some conversation about how important it is going to be to make sure that these faculty feel supported. And we've started already to do a number of things in the faculty. We've made a commitment that the new hires will be given at least one list A, either in their first or second year, depending on what time of year that they're hired. We've really concentrated on looking at that list that Renae provided. I hadn't seen that document before, same as Liz. So I made a meeting with Liz, I've shared that with Mike, and we are actually having conversations with the other deans and things to find a way forward to make sure that faculty do feel safe, that they do feel supported in their positions.
This led me to try to get more information from Dean Pettit about what was meant by the word safety. As Lindstrom's complaint against me was claimed to be confidential, even though she had left MRU, it became necessary to find a public source relating to me that would provide a specific example. As I had just been investigated for a complaint made by Lindstrom for allegedly saying that indigenous science was not science, something that I had in fact not said, I thought it would be helpful to use a reference to my edited volume, Indigenizing the University, Diverse Perspectives, which was just coming out. In this volume, the famous philosophy professor, scientist, and skeptic, Massimo Pigliucci, had said that indigenous science was not science. My concern was that he would not be able to speak at MRU because this would make it difficult for indigenous scholars like Lindstrom, who claimed to feel unsafe when they heard such a view.
Very much. Thank you, Jennifer. I just wanted to ask a question or have a general comment. I'm quite dissatisfied about the Provost's response to my question. I realized she didn't have very much time, and I didn't want to take up time because I knew she had a deadline. But I'm very concerned about the references to safety and making indigenous, the cluster hire, making indigenous scholars feel quote unquote safe at Mount Royal. As people are aware, I recently have a edited volume that came out on Indigenizing the University, Diverse Perspectives. And in that volume, there is a chapter by Massimo Pigliucci who argues that indigenous science, there is no such thing as indigenous science. He puts forth that perspective. And I just want to have reassurance that those kinds of arguments, which many find are controversial and so on, that those, we still can have space at Mount Royal University to have those kinds of discussions without it being perceived as being unsafe. So I was just wondering if you could say some words about that situation.
Sure. So I think the language of safety, Francis, also comes from our collective agreement. So I think that's where people are getting that language from, because it is part of the collective agreement. I forget the article number. But in terms of making sure that there is a space for freedom of expression, for academic freedom, I think absolutely. I think the faculty has done a pretty good job of trying to support events, for instance, that yourself and others have hosted on controversial topics. And I know Liz just put me on the Freedom of Expression committee, I forget the exact title, as well. And they are actually sending out a survey in the next short while to find out people's positive experiences, I think, on campus with freedom of expression and their negative experiences. So the committee wants to work through those and whatever they look like to figure out how best to apply the policy. So I think that the way is going to be open for more discussion on that. But also balancing, as Liz said, we need to make sure people do feel that they have if you don't like the word safe, a comfortable, welcoming work environment as well, while balancing that against the need, of course, as a university for academic freedom. So
But if just to ask you a little bit more detail about, I don't quite understand what that a welcoming, comfortable, I don't quite understand in the context of people being upset about an idea. I don't quite know where that's going, that kind of language. I'm very nervous about that kind of language because in an academic institution, putting forward ideas sometimes makes people feel quite uncomfortable. And I'm just worried about that language. So I don't know if you can resolve that.
Fair enough, Francis, but I don't think that in that context they're talking about academic debate, because I will defend people's right to have academic debate. We're a faculty of arts, for goodness sakes. We're not all going to agree on things, but I think part of it is what Liz alluded to about civility and how we treat each other in our interactions and things. So I think that is where the university is going to go. I can't speak for them. That's the president's subcommittee, but I think as a dean, certainly that's what I would like to see. I am a big believer in us debating things, but I think we do need to do it in a way that it is still professional, I guess is a good way to put it.
As a result of this exchange, an indigenous scholar by the name of Leonzo Barreno became upset. After a few faculty members had asked questions about other topics, Barreno stated the following.
Thank you so much for your report, Jen. It's very encouraging to see the last part of your presentation about the student-led initiatives. It really shows that the students are really eager to fight racism, fascism in all its forms, sexism, homophobia. That is really good. It's I think it's a huge percentage of our students who are doing that. It really encourages us as faculty to do that. As a Mayan, I felt a little bit insulted by a previous speaker who said that indigenous people have no science. I am a Mayan, for God's sakes, a Mayan. And I cannot speak for all my indigenous colleagues, but I have been teaching indigenous contributions to the world, including science, politics, social organizations, medicine. And so it's quite laughable, but you know, that's what it is. I think that's what makes our work worthwhile. And whoever quote the author that says that there is no such thing as indigenous science, I am sorry for laughing, but again, I'm a Mayan and I have been teaching this for 25 years, and I will continue teaching that. And my students just love that when I teach them this stuff. So thank you.
Well, hearing this, I couldn't believe what was happening, and that the speaker was allowing me to be personally attacked in this way for raising an academic point. The speaker should have ruled Barreno out of order for making such disparaging comments about another faculty member. Because the speaker was not controlling the proceedings properly, and because people have been using the chat for various purposes throughout the meeting, I typed 2 words, insulted, laughable, in the chat. As a result of these 2 words, a number of faculty members, Gulberk, Maclean, Tim Haney, Enrique Lopez, Renae Watchman, and the chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Tom Buchanan, decided to show their support for Barreno and began to gang up on me in the chat. This resulted in the dean intervening and the speaker telling people not to use the chat function except to put their name on the speakers list.
So can you just maybe make a comment about the chat function again?
Yeah, I think so too. Folks, you know, we're in a strange climate here. Typically, the chair will be able to rule things out of order or in order, make a ruling. We are reserving, please, the chat function for the speakers list. So in order to keep our meeting moving, the chair recognizes Gulberk, and please hold off on editorializing in the chat function.
After the chair recognized Gulberk Maclean, she proceeded to criticize me and support the use of SAFE.
I just wanted to support the use of safe, contrary to what Francis Widdowson was saying. Yes, of course, we can talk about any issue in an academic way. It's just that we need to do this in a sensitive way, and that's not too difficult. Okay, thank you.
3 other professors, Carmen Nielson, Aida Patient, and Mark Ayyash, were then recognized by the speaker and made comments that were responded to by the dean. Nielson and Patient stressed the need for civility, which turned out to be in reference to me, not Barreno.
Thank you so much for recognizing me. I think that the way that I want to respond to the Dean's report is that there are a lot of great initiatives going on in arts, and I think that we need a recommitment of a kind of community standard. One of the things that often gets lost is that a university is actually a community. And as a community, we are able to articulate particular values. And I wonder if it wouldn't be useful for the dean and any other interested groups to work on clarifying what our community standards are and what the limits of what limits of behavior there ought to be in the context of a community.
Awesome, thank you, Carmen. I think we've already been talking a little bit about that at DAG. We had a discussion about that very topic actually on Friday with the chairs and the associate deans. So I think you'll hear more about that soon as we're able to get going and hopefully back in person soon. We do have limitations on what we can do in that regard because we have to abide by the collective agreement and by legislation, obviously, but I do think it's a really important conversation to be had. I have seen a decline, I guess is the best word, in sometimes how we treat each other, and it's not certainly the kind of faculty that I want to be a part of if that's the case. There's lots of room for debate. There's lots of room for disagreement, but I do still think that we can see a way forward through that, as you've very well articulated, in terms of our values and who we want to be as a community. So thank you for that. And I do want to stress, we didn't have time to get into it in too much detail today. I do hope my past record speaks somewhat for my commitment to indigenization as a dean. I am committed to doing the best we can for our new hires and making sure that they are a welcome and important part of our community at Mount Royal, and more importantly in the Faculty of Arts. And I'd encourage you that this is a shared responsibility as well. What can we all be doing? It can't all be certainly top down to help support our new colleagues when they arrive. So thank you for that.
Great, thanks, Carmen and Jen. We have a question from Aida.
Hello, hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I know it's late, and I do not want to spend a lot of time, but the way I view the chat line at this point in time in our meetings is, it is essentially not a peanut gallery, but a place where people can place comments. And at times, most of the times, we are happy for somebody. We send congratulations, we send good thoughts, as we would on a collegial basis. But there have been times when those comments have been absolutely inappropriate for that particular function. So I don't know if I am at all out of line, but if we could take the chat function away from the collective and allow for people to be part of the conversation as they would. Put your hand up. You get to be part of the conversation. None of this side bit, even though we're losing the best part of it. But I don't want to see those negative, and there have been a couple of them in the past 5 minutes. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I will not say who it is, but I think that was absolutely inappropriate and shouldn't have been part of it, but it turns out it's part of it. And I think our community, Arts Faculty Council, is better than that. It doesn't even have to consider the repercussions of this. Sorry. And
I'll let Joe handle that since he's speaker and running the meeting. So.
I
Thank
couldn't
you.
agree with you more. I think there's an inclination, if we have the tool, we use it. To the boy with a new hammer, all the world is a nail. And if we have a keyboard, we tend to use it that way. And it is not appropriate. The purpose of the chat function is to expedite the functioning of the meeting.
Yes.
We have missed a lot. We've missed the chance to support each other. That is painful. But
Well, and on a
for the purpose of the
practical,
meeting, we need to conduct the faculty's business. Jennifer?
And my comment has absolutely nothing to do with Joe, you, or Jen at all. It really has to do with where is it going, and does it allow for difficult bits and pieces to filter their way in that shouldn't be there. And I don't know if that's a chat function. I'm just saying, I think if we were in person, people would not be talking unless, yeah.
so
Thank you.
just we'll take that away to the DAG agenda group to figure out if there's a way around it. Joe does do his best, and thank God for Joe to try to keep us on track. And I think Joe's comment there, it's hard not to, even if it's positive or negative. But it also allows people to jump the queue, right? In a normal meeting, you wouldn't start, well, sometimes,
That's not true.
but most times we don't just blurt things out. You have to be recognized as speaker and wait to hear your turn. We're doing the best we can. You know, we have over 100 people in the meeting right now, and I thank every day, Joe, for taking on trying to keep us on track. But we'll take away your comment and see what we can do. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
Mark Ayyash, a professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, then asserted that my comments were nonsensical and shouldn't be allowed at Arts Faculty Council.
Awesome. Thank you. Chair recognizes Mark.
Thank you. First of all, I don't see hate in thank you, Leonzo. Maybe some other people think thanks, Leonzo means vitriol, but okay, fine. That's your world, I guess.
Mark, I'm going to ask you to cut to a question,
I just want to finish one thing very quickly, because this is tied to this discussion. And some of this is, I'm sorry, but it's a little bit nonsensical, because why am I in an AFC listening to Francis talk about some guy's view on Mayan science or lack thereof? Why is that allowed in the first place? Please take that nonsense out of the AFC, because that's not the space for it. You know, you do your talk on your own, do your whatever, have whatever talk you want, organize it, but I don't really care to hear about that here. Why am I hearing about that in the first place here? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Your point is taken.
After hearing the reactions of these faculty members, especially the comments by Mark Ayyash, I could remain silent no longer. This was the second confrontational meeting that had occurred in the last few months, and I was being maligned for no reason. Like the case of Gabrielle Lindstrom, everyone was supporting Leonzo Barreno because he was an indigenous scholar, when I was the one who was being attacked for trying to make academic arguments about the danger of using the word safety to apply to the examination of ideas. This led me to put a point of privilege in the chat, resulting in the following exchange between me and the speaker, Joe Anderson.
Francis, you've had a chance to speak. You're raising point of privilege. I see you.
I am going to speak. There is a terrible, terrible double standard in the Faculty of Arts. Everyone uses the chat for their own political purposes. I make a couple of comments of what I thought were highly uncivil remarks, by Lorenzo. I think what Mark says, Mark Ayyash, is totally unacceptable. I was using an example of something which is completely on point, which is we are not allowed to question whether indigenous science exists or not. That is an academic point, and I am tired of people smearing me as a racist and a hate monger for making academic arguments.
Francis,
Stop the double
your
standards.
point has been made. I'm going to ask you to turn off your mic, and we're going to take any last questions for Jennifer regarding her point.
We need to wrap up, Joe. We're at 4 o'clock, so I think we need to move on to the rest of the agenda.
So, as can be seen, after I was reminded about the proper use of the chat function, the first time this had happened, in spite of the fact that people were using it for all sorts of comments throughout the meeting, I raised a point of privilege to follow the procedures in Robert's Rules of Order when one needs to answer a point of misconduct by another member. When I was told to stop talking, I did so. Therefore, it is hard to see how it was my actions that could have been disruptive or requiring the elimination of the chat function. This matter, however, did not end there. That evening and the next day, a number of faculty members involved in the mobbing decided to continue to pile on by making posts on social media and supporting the posts made by others. Faculty members like Tim Haney and Renae Watchman, who had supported Barreno's uncivil comments, remarked how there was a crazy meltdown in the meeting. Unbeknownst to me, a number of faculty members were also sending emails critical of my behavior to Dean Pettit and Speaker Anderson. These emails would play a role in my termination 9 months later. Perhaps because of these emails, Dean Pettit sent an email to all faculty members a few days later, telling us that the chat function would be disabled at future AFC meetings because of the behavior at the last meeting. At the time, it was unclear if the email was directed at me or other faculty members. Then, 2 weeks later, Renae Watchman filed a harassment complaint against me. In this complaint, Watchman referenced the March 5th, 2021 meeting. She stated that Francis Widdowson obfuscated Indigenous faculty's claims of overt and systemic racism with merely questioning indigenization, which, she claimed, diverted from the fact that Indigenous faculty do not feel safe at MRU. Watchman went on to argue that I publicly announced that there was no such thing as Indigenous science and used the chat to ridicule an Indigenous faculty member, Leonzo Barreno. MRU's decision to take this complaint to an investigation was a clear violation of my academic freedom, as it was enacting disciplinary measures in response to my engagement in collegial governance. This resulted in me filing a grievance on August 19th, 2021, after I had made extensive inquiries about Watchman's complaint. When meeting with the dean in September 2021 to discuss the grievance, I prepared a 150-page response to Watchman's allegations. Included in this was my analysis of the March 5th, 2021 AFC meeting. In attachment 8 of this response, I provided a transcript of my comments that showed that I did not state that there was no such thing as Indigenous science and never ridiculed an Indigenous faculty member. I merely questioned whether it was appropriate for him to claim that my academic assertions were insulting and laughable. I also provided evidence of how I was harassed at this meeting in attachments 9 and 10. I followed this up a week later with the MRU's Human Resources Manager, Mark Friesen, as I could not believe that Watchman's complaint had been vetted as was required by MRU's procedures. This document attached the material that I had submitted to Dean Pettit concerning my grievance about Watchman's complaint, which again presented the transcript from the March 5th, 2021 Arts Faculty Council meeting and the evidence showing that I was being mobbed by a number of faculty members. Although extensive documentation was sent to administration about how Watchman's complaint lacked merit and was probably frivolous and vexatious and made in bad faith, I was forced to go through 6.5 hours of investigation meetings with Jeff Hope, an investigator hired by MRU. On October 27th, 2021, Hope and I discussed the March 5th, 2021 Arts Faculty Council meeting.
The last bullet is at the bottom of page 6. It talks about this Arts Faculty Council meeting and obfuscated Indigenous faculty's claims of overt and systemic racism with merely questioning indigenization. And I'll reserve my comment on that. So she's suggesting you questioned indigenization in some way, and she gives her comment here on the last page as it goes over the page, the final page here on page 7. So you publicly announced there's no such thing as Indigenous science, and you to ridicule an Indigenous faculty member. So I'm assuming the thing that you raised was along the same lines as the two other events that we just went through around Indigenous science, questioning Indigenous science. But did you, I mean, she said you used the chat to ridicule somebody, and so, like, what's your perspective on that? What did you say, actually?
So, fortunately, again, I have a recording of it, so I can, and this is really what is annoying, is if I was not on the ball about this, and was realizing I was being targeted for termination by these people, this mob that's going after me, I wouldn't have recorded any of this material, and it would have just been a he said, she said kind of situation. But fortunately, I do have the situation. So, okay, so it was on March 5th, 2021. The provost, so there's a bunch of stuff that happened at this meeting, which I'm just going to go over, and I have the recordings here. Dr. Elizabeth Evans, who's the provost, she was coming to talk to us about things that were happening. And as a result of this, Liam Haggarty, who we are well aware of what Liam Haggarty has been up to, he made a statement about how, and this was in the context of everything that had been happening over the last, I guess it's March, so now it's 8 months that this has been going on for. And I'm really kind of amazed at the gall of these people, because they're going after me, they're making my workplace poisonous, and then they're sort of acting as if somehow I'm the one who's the problem. And when I heard the word safe space and so on, I thought, oh, this is again, I'm the target here. Like, I am supposed to be quiet because people don't feel safe. And so this led me to put my hand up, and I got in the queue. Then things started to go out of control at the meeting a bit later, because what happened is I was dissatisfied with the provost's response, because she just said something like, of course, that they supported academic freedom, and what she was concerned about was quote unquote civility, which was not the issue. Like, as you saw, I was perfectly civil in those two examples. Like, it's not about being uncivil, it's about people like Renae Watchman not accepting that someone can have a view that is critical of their perspective, which is an anti-intellectual position. Anyway, so the dean, so the meeting went on, and I was still kind of bothered by this response. I wasn't satisfied, and I thought, people aren't really understanding the situation here, which is, it's not about civility, it's about content. So in this case, this indigenous scholar is laughing at me, saying what I'm saying is insulting, and laughing at me for basically relaying the views of Massimo Pigliucci, who is a major scholar in the United States on, pseudoscience, and has, been studying this area. And I was pretty outraged when I was hearing him say this, because it's he is the one who's being uncivil here. He's not, he's mocking me and doing all this sort of thing that I'm, just mentioning this big problem that I can't do this, and he's saying he's insulted by it and everything, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so at this point, the chat, I put some words in the chat because I was kind of outraged, and at this point the speaker should have intervened when Leonzo was doing this and said, can we please not have this, unprofessional type of approach. Dr. Widdowson is entitled to her scholarship, and you're blah blah blah. You shouldn't be laughing and stuff like that. Anyway, so I was kind of sitting there going, I can't believe this is happening. And so I put in the chat, and I have a screenshot of this at 3:47 p.m. This was close to the end of the meeting. I just put 2 words in the chat. Insulted, ? Laughable, ? So that's what I put in the chat. And people have been using the chat for the whole meeting, right? Because the idea is we're not supposed to use the chat. Oops, I got my bug. I'm getting the, we're not supposed to use the chat for, we're supposed to be putting on the speakers list and things like that, not, doing stuff. But I just did that because I thought the speaker was not, I should have said point of order or something like that, but I just, because everyone else is using the chat. And at that point, everyone started going after me for using the chat. So they stopped the chat, and then I got all this barrage of insults and stuff in the chat, and I was just, I was going, this is what, here it is before our eyes that this is happening, that I'm asking a question, which is nothing wrong with it. It's completely on point, because it's about, people are talking about uncomfortable and unsafe and all these things, and I'm saying, people are feeling unsafe because I'm asking questions about indigenous science. People are feeling unsafe because Massimo Pigliucci is doing this chapter questioning indigenous science. Like this is the problem, not the fact that it's uncivil or anything like that. And in response to that, this guy is sort of basically telling me that because he's a Mayan and I'm not, or that Massimo Pigliucci isn't a Mayan, then we're not entitled to our opinions on indigenous science and so on. And so then there's a whole bunch of stuff in the chat congratulating Leonzo for what he said and laughing with him. And then I'm just getting more and more steamed up here. And I'm holding back. Anyway, so then a whole barrage of new people comes on saying their piece. And Mark Ayyash, who is the worst one, comes on and says, and people are appear to be blaming me for using the chat, for it's completely inappropriate, and then Ayyash, and the dean appears to be agreeing with them, which I was really shocked by. So that was that meeting, which was completely just you know, it just showed again, which I was trying to get at, that we have a toxic environment that has been created by people like Renae Watchman and the MRU Anti-Racism Coalition and the 40 faculty members who have been mobbing me since end of July 2020. And instead of supporting my academic freedom and my ability to honestly engage with things, Mount Royal is trying to protect its brand and is subjecting me to what I consider to be harassment. It is complicit in Renae Watchman's harassment of me, and that is what is happening at Mount Royal University.
When Jeff Hope issued his report on November 18th, 2021, he noted that Renae Watchman suggested it was inappropriate for Dr. Widdowson to state that the concept of indigenous knowledge has no scientific rigor. In examining my participation in the meeting, Hope did not find that my comments or behavior were in any way harassing or inappropriate. He then went on to state that, to be frank, the exchanges regarding Dr. Widdowson's points among the attendees at this meeting seemed to illustrate some unduly disrespectful and dismissive behavior by others. Once again, however, the matter did not end there. On December 13th, 2021, I participated in my final disciplinary meeting with Elizabeth Evans. This resulted in Evans asserting that there were a number of faculty members who were refusing to work with me.
But I want to be clear that we're here to fairly consider the issues and determine how we're going to best proceed at this point in time. There are two external investigations that are the subject of our discussion today. The one by Steve Eichler with respect to Dr. Tim Haney, and the other one by Jeff Hope with respect to Dr. Renae Watchman. And I think it's important to put in context, you know, that these are associated with ongoing matters that are being discussed and that I want to discuss today in terms of, you know, sort of the endless investigation processes that we've been through that are costly to both the institution and to others. I think that we have bordered on some issues around the reputation of the institution through this whole process. And I am mindful that as we've gone through this, you know, it is increasingly surfacing that colleagues, you know, are now starting to refuse to work with you, Francis, because of all the interactions that have taken place.
This led me to ask Provost Evans to provide evidence of this allegation, something that Evans refused to do.
As well, I had a question before we proceed. You mentioned, Provost Evans, that colleagues are refusing to work with me. Could you please substantiate that claim?
Well, I have it on authority from your dean that there have been requests not to participate in committee meetings. I don't have the specific details of that in front of me, but I do know that those requests have been made.
Because no one has alerted me to any of these circumstances, and I'm not on any committees right now, so I don't know how could that possibly could be that people are not working with me or have refused to work with me.
So as I said, I don't have any of those details in front of me, but it has been shared with me that that has come forward in potentially in consideration that you may be on some of the committees. I don't, as I said, I don't have the details with me.
But I want to put it forward right now that that is an unsubstantiated allegation, and it appears that it cannot be true.
I can't speak to that. That's obviously your perception of the situation.
Well, there's no evidence. There's no evidence to support that allegation that has been made.
Well,
and I find it to be highly prejudicial as well to make those kinds of allegations without evidence.
Francis, I have not been privy to the conversations that you've had with your dean or conversations that you've had with others. I am just making aware of something that has been shared with me.
But I'm just letting you know that I have had no such conversations with my dean about this. There have been no conversations about this.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave that matter because this is not going to resolve itself here.
This exchange led Provost Evans to contact Dean Pettit when she was trying to decide if termination should be the appropriate disciplinary measure. In this email, Provost Evans asked Pettit about the significant changes made to the faculty council meetings for arts and to outline to what extent Francis's behavior contributed to the decision to make changes. In her reply, Pettit stated that there have been several incidents in the past years when Francis asked questions or made comments that many perceived as irrelevant or purposefully inflammatory. I am sure that she would describe them as exercising her academic freedom. Pettit went on to state that the worst incident took place on March 5th, 2021, where I made comments about indigenous science. Pettit asserted that I refused to acknowledge the speaker and kept going when I was asked to stop speaking. This, according to Pettit, was very upsetting to many people, and the chair of sociology and anthropology had to meet with the indigenous faculty member, i.e. Leonzo Barreno, to ensure they were okay. Pettit then sent Provost Evans a number of emails criticizing me, saying that my behavior was incredibly disruptive and disturbing. The dean, however, failed to send the provost an email from Bob Uttl, a psychology professor from MRU, who pointed out it was inappropriate for Leonzo Barreno to attack another member's serious questions about the meaning of indigenization and safe spaces as being or having insulting and laughable ideas. Because Dean Pettit provided misleading information about what actually transpired on March 5th, 2021, and because Pettit, MRU's Human Resources Department, and Provost Evans all had ignored my multiple attempts to correct the record, this infraction was added to my termination letter as example number 4. As a result, I was fired from my tenured position on December 20th, 2021. Pettit's bias continued during her testimony at the arbitration hearing on January 16th, 17th, and 20th, 2023. According to Arbitrator Jones, Pettit stated that I frequently raised points at meetings that were not related to the business at hand, citing her question about indigenous science at an arts faculty council meeting in the spring of 2021. On May 16th, 2023, Mary Lee Mulholland, now the chair of sociology and anthropology, testified about the AFC meeting. Her highly biased testimony can be seen in the notes that I made of the arbitration hearing. Mulholland stated that Leonzo Barreno was a Mayan and a refugee and a survivor of genocide who was deeply troubled by my statement because of its genocidal rhetoric. Mulholland said that she went to Barreno's home to reassure him that he had done nothing wrong. She said that he was only defending his people and that he had the support of the sociology and anthropology department. Barreno was distraught, according to Mulholland, and wanted to go on medical leave as he didn't think he was going to be able to finish the semester because of the incident. Arbitrator Jones, when relaying Mulholland's testimony, did not recount how Mulholland had stated that Barreno had done nothing wrong and had the support of the sociology and anthropology department, or that Barreno was inquiring about how to go on medical leave because of the incident. Furthermore, in response to my accurate testimony about this, Jones stated that Dr. Widdowson disputes Dr. Mulholland's description of what occurred at this AFC meeting. This was in spite of the fact that Arbitrator Jones himself had viewed the video of this meeting on January 23rd, 2023, and this video showed that I was responding to several comments about the retention of Indigenous faculty and the need to make them feel safe. Why didn't Arbitrator Jones provide his own analysis of the video that he saw with his own eyes? On June 19th, 2023, the former speaker, Joseph Anderson, was called to testify at the arbitration hearing. Arbitrator Jones asserts that Anderson argued that my comment about Indigenous science was not germane to the business at hand, even though it was in response to 3 faculty members talking about the problems of retaining Indigenous scholars and making them feel safe. Anderson said that the example of Indigenous science that I used was a verbal Molotov cocktail. My comments, according to Anderson, had no bearing on the discussion and were like a trap that people would walk into. Anderson maintained that my question contributed to a breakdown of trust, collegiality, and the AFC's shared sense of mission. 2 MRU professors who were supportive of my academic freedom, Sinclair MacRae and Bob Uttl, also testified at the arbitration hearing in June and October 2023, respectively. Arbitrator Jones maintains that MacRae pointed out that a group of faculty members were opposed to me even being able to ask questions, and that a number of them used the chat function to belittle my question about academic freedom at the March 5th, 2021 meeting. Sinclair admitted that he was ashamed he didn't speak up at the time. According to Arbitrator Jones, Bob Uttl asserted that the chair should have called to order the people making inappropriate comments about me at the March 5th, 2021 meeting. In spite of an arbitration report that was riddled with errors, Arbitrator Jones did make one important finding of fact. He noted that a number of the 12 factors given by MRU to justify my termination are not worthy to be considered in a university that values academic freedom. In this regard, Arbitrator Jones specifically references the March 5th, 2021 AFC meeting. In spite of this assertion by the arbitrator, Dean Jennifer Pettit sent out an email to all members of my department asserting that the arbitrator had found that MRU had not violated my academic freedom. This was in direct conflict with Arbitrator Jones's statement that many of the 12 factors used to decide to terminate me were not worthy of an institution that valued academic freedom. Example 4, the March 5th, 2021 AFC meeting therefore, is a very important case of how my academic freedom was violated. MRU has tried to continuously punish me for performing my academic duties while I was ganged up on and insulted by a number of faculty members promoting indigenization. This was a direct attack on collegial governance. Collegiality's requirement to allow for a diversity of opinions, ensuring that no individual is given an advantage in bodies of governance, and including all who should be participating, were violated on March 5th, 2021. My opinions were deemed to be off topic when they were directly responding to the question of retaining Indigenous scholars at MRU. When I was attacked by several faculty members for raising these opinions, the speaker and the dean protected these faculty members in their efforts to ostracize me and poison my work environment. What became obvious from the AFC meeting is how the imperative of equity, diversity, and inclusion is a prescribed doctrine, a predetermined conclusion that must be supported, which undermines academic freedom. MRU's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion claims to embrace all aspects of individual and group identity, and that ideas, statements, and espoused beliefs may be challenged and examined. But this only applies when the identities and ideas are supportive of indigenization and is directive to foster respect for Indigenous ways of knowing. Everyone is free to talk endlessly about the need to make Indigenous scholars feel safe, but when there's an attempt to try to shed light on what this actually means in practice, discussion is shut down. Dissenters are ostracized, then institutionally censored and purged with manufactured findings of harassment. As is shown by the March 5th, 2021 Arts Faculty Council meeting, my firing from Mount Royal University was not due to how I treated other colleagues or comported myself. My questions were perfectly respectful and civil, and I was attacked by an Indigenous scholar and his allies who were neither. Because my ideas challenged the political beliefs that were being imposed upon all members of the university community, my diverse ideas could not be included because criticism of indigenization made Indigenous scholars feel unsafe. MRU has continuously tried to hide this fact because it shows how far MRU has strayed from its academic mission.